Hey, welcome to the Church in Action podcast. I'm Charles Galda. We're still working on our intro clip there, but AJ Gordon is one of our founders, and that's part of a hymn that you probably will recognize that AJ Gordon wrote. And so we're looking to honor his work with us. He's blessed so many, and we want to honor that. And so, but welcome to the Church in Action podcast again. We talk about issues of God and culture to accelerate our ability to make disciples who do justice and share Jesus to transform New England. We believe when the people of God do the work of God, it's evangelistic, and people want to know Jesus then. So today we're talking about making disciples. Jesus tells us to make disciples, and we think of that as believers who understand Jesus's teaching, and their love is evidenced by action. They're willing to disadvantage themselves to do justice and serve others, and for unity. And when we do that, it opens the doors to sharing Jesus. But we're not willing to do those things if we're not really being disciples. And so we really have been having a lot of conversation in New England about making disciples lately. Suddenly there's a lot of traction and interest around this and revisiting it and trying to think about what we've missed in the past and what we need to be doing differently in the future. And so we're going to be focusing a lot on that over the course of the next months. And we're starting that focus with two good friends of Vision New England and good friends for me and just people who blessed me and so many others, Pat and Tammy McLeod. They're both Harvard chaplains with Cru. You may remember them from our June 10th podcast where they talked about their book, Hit Hard, which if you haven't read it, I'd urge you to get it. It's a great read. Tammy is also director of college ministry at Park Street Church, so has a couple of hands in college ministry in different places. She's an advisor to Christian Impact and Athletes in Action, an instructor for interpersonal communications programs, and a director of Vision New England, so one of my bosses. And so Tammy and Pat, thanks so much for being with us today.
You're welcome, Charles. Thanks for having us.
Yes.
Can you share, just in case folks aren't remembering from June, can you share your background a little bit? Just reintroduce yourself to folks. Where are you from? How did you wind up in Boston at Harvard and stuff like that?
So let me begin, Charles, on that. Tammy and I, well, I'll speak for myself. I'll let her tell her own story. I became a Christian in college. I actually wasn't raised in a Christian home. I grew up in the West, born in Montana, raised in Wyoming, and then went back to college at Montana State, not to get an education, but to play college football. That was my life. And because of being an athlete, I was, even though I wasn't religious necessarily, I was very superstitious. And when someone invited me to events that I thought might put God on my side, I would go with them. And I found myself at one of the first, well, actually the first meeting of the year of a Campus Crusade for Christ ministry. And the guy, the chaplain, the equivalent of what I am now in a college, initiated with me, and he invited me to have lunch with him or a Coke with him or something. And he basically asked me the Kennedy question about, if you were to die tonight and stand before God, and he said, "Why should I let you into heaven? What would you say?" And I had no idea. And he said, "Well, how sure are you on that you would go to heaven?" And I said to him, last week I think I could have made it in, but I'm pretty sure I couldn't make it this week. And he went on. He just gave me a booklet written by Bill Bright that was called "How to Be Sure You're a Christian." He said, "I want you to read this 3 times, and then let's get back together and talk." And after the second time through, I actually realized that Christianity was not what I thought it was. And so I literally got on my knees, prayed the recommended prayer, and began to meet this guy for follow-up, and soon became fully enmeshed, not only in that campus ministry, but in the local church. And after graduation, that was, I just realized that there was nothing that I loved more than doing the kind of ministry that I'd started to do as a college student. And so we ended up joining staff with Cru. And I'll let Tammy tell her story and maybe add a few things to it.
So my sorority president asked me 3 tough questions my sophomore year of college. Why are you here? Where are you going? And what makes you happy? So I couldn't answer the questions, never thought about them before. And went home during a break in semesters and tried to write out the answers and got so frustrated that I couldn't figure it out that I threw the paper across the room and just yelled, "God, what's missing?" And I went back to my dorm second semester and was sitting there, and there was somebody in the lobby, and I said, "Hey, what are you doing? Good to see you." And she said, "Oh, I'm taking leadership surveys." So I asked her if I could take one. And the last question was, what do you think about Jesus as a leader? And I said, I think he was a great leader. And I think she assumed from that I was a Christian, but I wasn't yet. So she invited me to a Bible study, and I didn't know what that term was. So I thought, well, I'm trying to figure out the answers to these questions. I'll just try this thing, Bible study. And I went to the first one, and it was so wonderful just seeing for the first time the power of the scriptures. That's what stood out to me more than anything, is for the first time I was reading God's word. And so I just wanted to keep going back. And eventually got invited to a retreat. And at the retreat, it was the same thing for me, only I listened to a video that they played on how to be sure you're a Christian. And when I listened to that video by Dr. Bright, he invited us to come to know Jesus. And so I just prayed in a room in front of a video that Christ would come into my life and take me where he wanted me to be.
And so you both become Christians in college then, and you meet up somewhere along the way. Yeah, I think so. I think that's right.
Yes, actually, we both were on a summer mission project together while in college, and that's where I fell in love with Tammy. She was a little bit slower on to react, but eventually, when she found out I was interested, she reciprocated, and we really had a long distance relationship. We didn't figure this out until the last couple of days of that project, but yeah, she was a student in Pennsylvania. I was in Montana, and she came out to see me, and I proposed to her, and then we got married. And as I said earlier, we joined staff with crew. Initially went to California, Northern California. We worked at the University of Pacific, and really our intention was to work as international missionaries. Really had a heart to do that, but our attempt to go there to the country that we wanted to go to was thwarted by the fact that they were trying to indigenize their staff team, and they recommended that we just go back and be a sending ministry, and so we ended up going back to Montana State, and then after 12 years there, we came here to Boston.
Pat, I don't think in all the years I think about people who've told me the story of how they met, I think I've yet to hear the story where it starts out, well, she really liked me. And it's always no. She said no 6 times, and then she finally went out with me. And so then you guys come to Boston to do your graduate work, right, Pat? Yeah,
that's right. We weren't planning on being full-time staff here and staying here. I was just going to get my PhD and go back to Montana and continue the work that we were doing there. But that all changed. The PhD took 10 years. And in that time, also, we had a tragedy happen in our life where our son, Zach, was tragically brain injured. That's the book you referenced earlier. And ironically, we had bonded with the vision of reaching the students of the city right away when I, volunteered to be a temporary leader of the crew ministry in Boston. So we were already moving in that direction. But then when Zach got hurt, we just can't imagine being anywhere else but here, given the kind of services and care that is provided for him.
And so that temporary assignment is how long now?
21 years. 22.
It's only temporary from the perspective of eternity, right? And so if you could just give a quick sketch about when you're talking about Zach and Hit Hard, how is he doing? And maybe just let people know what that is if they missed last time.
Okay. At 16 years old, Zach was playing football and had a massive traumatic brain injury. And so we decided to write the story of our journey through the process of learning about ambiguous loss, where you have a person and you don't have a person at the same time. You don't have them in the same way. And so he now lives in a group home and he has 24/7 care. So someone sits with him all through the night by his bed, walks him to the bathroom, things like that. He has a gait belt, a brace on his leg. He's never allowed to walk alone, so you just have to hold on to the belt every step. He has very little short-term memory and very little speech.
Okay.
So he knows everyone from the past, can interact with people in the present, but he can't. If he would meet you, Charles, he would meet you 5 minutes later and he wouldn't remember that he met you.
Yeah.
But he is the happiest and most joyful person that I know in the world. And probably has one of the greatest ministries of anyone that I've seen. Like at church, people are really ministered to by him.
Yeah.
And so it's wonderful that he's been left in a state that he is still really close to God. Nothing's changed in his relationship with God. He loved him so much before the injury, and he still does. So that's the bright light in the story.
And you guys have some videos of Zach and some of what he does and his experiences. And where are those again? Is that Pat and Tammy?
Yeah, Pat
.com?
McLeod, and it's MCLEOD.com.
And sorry, I spoke over you. Pat and Tammy McLeod?
Yes.
Okay, so Ashley, our producer, will put a link actually in the text just in case folks have trouble finding it. And so you're both at Cru. And what is Cru?
Yeah, so Cru is an international, interdenominational Christian ministry that originated on college campuses and has now spread to multiple ministries, family ministries, sports ministries, executive ministries, all kinds of different focused on different populations. And we currently are, on, I forget now the number of countries in the world, but just pretty much everywhere in the world, there are people on the staff of Cru, 25,000 of them. And we have stayed in the campus ministry our entire time, and our focus was really on everyone on a college campus, both students, staff, faculty, knowing someone who truly loves and follows Christ. We like to think of ourselves as a caring community that's passionate about connecting people to Jesus Christ.
And so some folks may remember it from years ago as Campus Crusade for Christ.
Right.
And Bill Bright probably spoke at one of our old Congress events years ago, I bet, right? So many people did. And so rebranded as Cru some years ago. And so you're both with Cru. Tammy, you're with Park Street too. And so some folks who may not be from the Boston area or be students of church history, can you just shed a little light for folks on Park Street Church?
Yes. So Park Street Church has been around for over 200 years. And we are on the tagline on the front of the church that says Evangelical, Trinitarian, Congregational. So it's a congregational church. And we have about 1,000 members right now. 3 services on Sunday, traditional worship in the morning and contemporary in the evening. But Park Street, almost 30 years ago, formed a partnership with Cru to reach the 250,000 students in the city. So we have 45 Cru staff in the city. and 25 of them go to Park Street.
Wow.
So we try to help students connect on campuses. So if we have a student from a campus that we're on, we will invite them into small groups and the ministry on that campus so that they can just walk across the hall to go to a Bible study and bring friends with them. But also we try to make the church a home for college students. So we invite them into Christian ed classes. We invite them to do service opportunities. We do socials with them. We have mentors that meet with students at Park Street who desire them. We have families who host students in their homes for meals or retreats. So we're trying, and especially this year, focusing on integrating the students into the life of the church.
And so if for folks who walked the Freedom Trail in Boston, they know Park Street Church, even if they don't remember Park, that was it. They've been by and in Park Street Church, and very significant today, of course, but historically significant in the whole mission sending movement. The first, if not one of the first, if not the first church to really send missionaries out from America. Isn't that true?
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so it's a big strength of the church is the missions. So we have a lot of global missions, and recently in the past few years, our city engagement has really ramped up. We're serving a lot of churches in Boston with food for their food pantries. We have a warming center on Saturdays for unhoused people. And so we're actually going to take 150 students over to Park Street. So Cru students from 22 campuses to serve in both of those ministries on September 10th. So we're trying to just see if, since service matters to students, could the city engagement ministry of Park Street be a place where they could really connect? So they don't have to make up their own service opportunities. They can just step into them.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. And so Jesus tells us make disciples. And so I told you how we think about disciples. How do you guys define a disciple? What are you aiming for? Because you only have people for 4 years, right? Typically, but well, maybe 5 now, right? but what do you, when you're trying to make a disciple, what are you aiming for?
Yeah, I take my lead right from Jesus' teaching about how he defined a disciple. I think of what he says in Luke 14 about if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father, mother, father, wife, children, he cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me, whoever does not give up all of his possessions, excuse me. Also, he talks in John about how, if you abide in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine, and you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So there's not only this total surrender element of what it means to be a disciple, but there's also this abiding in his word and being, word filled, I guess is maybe a way of putting it. And then he also in John talks about, by this will all men know that you're my disciples if you have love for one another. And he also says, I'm trying to remember what they are. Anyway, it's in John 15. He talks about, by this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. And maybe one last verse, and then I'll give you my definition. Because a couple verses when Jesus invited Peter, he said, follow me and I'll make you a fisher of men. And at the end of Matthew, when he commissions them, he says, go make disciples and teach them to observe all that I've commanded you. So putting all those together, and I think I like to think of a disciple as someone who's totally committed to and moving toward complete identification with Christ's will, perspective, character, and ministry. So there's that total surrender, but then there's this process of being formed, being transformed, in our character and in our disciple making and ministry service. So would you add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we, in addition to defining a disciple, we try to set environments where students can grow to love and follow Christ and become like him. So we've moved away from doing a lot of one-on-one discipleship, which we used to do decades ago, now into more small groups. And I remember being trained by Henry Cloud. He said the church has set up inside of it the most powerful structure for change, which is the small group. And so we look at small groups as not an arrow coming from the leader to all the people, but arrows going back and forth across the small group. So the whole group is ministering to the whole group. And another thing that Henry said was a small group is not a place to dispense the goods, but it's part of the goods themselves. So we don't just think of small groups as a place to teach something, but we're actually watching the process of how people are interacting with each other. We talk about DNA as a framework for small groups, divine truth. So we're always interacting with the word, nurturing relationships. We're caring for each other in the small groups. So like the 70 one another's, those passages in the New Testament, just doing them, actually doing the one another's together. And then apostolic mission, just always remembering the outward movement. So we're talking in our small groups about how to reach out to people who don't yet know Jesus.
And so there's a couple of things I'd like to hit on in what you guys were just saying. And so Pat, you were talking about this concept of surrender. What are you finding that it's hard for young people to surrender today?
Yeah. I mean, we work most directly with the students at Harvard, and I don't think any surprise to anyone that most of the students who are there don't just all of a sudden one day show up at Harvard, just one of the many schools that they decided to apply to. They've been thinking about getting into that school and others like it for their lifetime, and so I would say the short answer is careerism. People are very, very focused on that, and I think that's probably the big thing. What would you add to that?
One thing is also relationships. So I remember when I first came to know Jesus, I needed to tell my non-Christian boyfriend that I came to know Jesus. And when I did, he said, "You need to change back." And I said, "I can't." And so he said, "Then it's over." And I said, "I knew you would say that." And so the relationship ended, and it was an 8-year relationship. So it's hard for students to surrender that area of their life.
I mean, the acceptance and friendships that they have that don't work anymore as they start to surrender to Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay. And has that changed over the years? So because you don't have a cross section of American youth coming there, Pat. I think that's a good point, right? You have a very select group of people you're dealing with. That's probably true in most of the Boston schools. And so have you seen that change, or has that always been the case?
I actually think it hasn't really changed. I don't think.
I agree.
I think I think these things. I mean, it is true that when we were working in the school that I went to, which is Montana State University, there are kids that are there at a school like that are, it's just kind of the next step of life, and they're looking for their future wife or husband, and there's not the pressure around them in some cases to do anything other than to maybe go back and work on the farm, or to settle into a pretty average job in their mind, that it's like they're not wrapping up their whole identity in their net worth and so I think that might be a little bit different, but still, people are the idols that humans worship haven't really changed. There's pleasure, there's our pride and fame and recognition and just material possessions, all that stuff. Those are still, they have their hold on, I think, all of us. So
yeah, has it gotten worse, or would you say it's the same? Because I think we have a perception we're all a little bit more focused on that kind of stuff these days than we might have been 20 years ago. Is that true for students?
What do you think?
I think it is a little, no, I'm just not sure. I think it probably is campus focused because I think this has always been the case, probably at this university, the careerism. And I've never really seen it change with the relationships. We've had some students get into bad relationships and their marriages are now over. So
I think it's more, Charles, is just there is some differences between some of the schools like Harvard and others that we've been on. There's a tremendous amount of pressure to avoid anything that doesn't look really prestigious as far as your career, and I just think people they're carrying that weight with them. And so it's not like we see, in Montana, we saw a lot of our staff who would want to just, give their life to being a missionary, for example. Not so much at Harvard, although I have been surprised at how many have gone into pastoral ministry. Several of our students have graduated and become pastors. So
yeah, you guys it's a difficult spot, I imagine, for some of the reasons you're talking about, but it's also a very strategic one because in some sense, the students coming out of Boston are going to run the world, right? Because they go out into other countries where they're part of the governing elite, business elite, right? They are that here in this country too, in many cases. And so the impact of your ministry has real global implications and serious ones to the extent those kids are becoming disciples.
That's right.
Now the kids, I shouldn't say kids, the young people you're working with, the young people you're working with are coming out of church home, saved and looking for a place for Christian connection, or kids who never heard of Jesus and walked in the door when they heard something going on or a friend invited them, or somewhere in between?
So we have some students who come to college and get involved in Christian groups and some don't. And we've met incredible leaders from really strong churches where they were well developed theologically and biblically. We have children of pastors or Christian parents, but we also have committed followers of Christ who grew up in non-Christian homes. We've worked with students who've led already in Young Life or FCA, and then they just come and continue leading in college.
Yeah, and I think we also see people come to Christ who have no background at all and actually really, and their lives are transformed. And those are the people, in fact, that when I think about my ministry over the years, those are probably more that, because I know one of the questions you brought up is, how's the church doing at preparing people? And I'm like, that's a question I want to think more about. But when I realized as I thought about it, that there are actually a lot of students that we pour into that have no church background. So,
and so you've got a whole spectrum of young people there. And so I do want to come back to that question, Pat, because I think it's an interesting one to at least, even if you haven't really chewed on it for this conversation, I would like to hear at least initial impressions about what we can learn from you guys, because we're all in our home churches, right? And we send these kids off, and of course, we know from the data, a lot of kids stop going to church, stop being engaged, walk away from their faith. But then there's kids who stay engaged, but I'd love to hear, as the catchers, if you will, what you're seeing that's good, and seeing where maybe some of us are missing the boat. I know I haven't given you tons of time to chew on that, so it can be a meaty question, but what's your first reaction to it?
I think I just thought about some things students are missing as we receive them. I like your catcher metaphor. Every time we teach our course on interpersonal communication, we're certified instructors for this program. We ask, how many of you have ever seen people get into a conflict and then you actually watch them in front of you resolve it to a conclusion, and no one raises his or her hand? So
Wow.
They see the fight start, and they see that the two people like each other again, but they've never seen the process of how the people got there. And so that's one thing, is they're missing training in conflict resolution. Also, because of Zach's injury, we've seen that students haven't really learned how to grieve. And so that's an area that they're weak in. We have to teach biblical lament and the importance of just receiving the gift of tears from God and crying out to him in pain. And then spiritual practices, we found that when we teach them, students really enjoy doing them, but they're not very strong coming in on those things. So Sabbath, it's very, very hard to see a college student actually take a Sabbath, not study for a day, since that's their work, and just spend more time with God and their friends and enjoying life. So Sabbath is very hard for them.
For most college students, it's the opposite. It's like every day is Sabbath, right?
And then slow meditative reading of the word. Sometimes students spend time in the word daily, but many times they don't. So we're trying to train them to be in the word every day. Learning different ways to pray. They might have only learned one way to pray. So just broadening their understanding of how to connect with God through prayer. So we actually try to spend a lot of time working on spiritual discipline so that they can see how to connect with God.
And that's really interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that dynamic, that I guess, again, is going to be a little bit different for some of the more elite universities. It's just nonstop work versus nonstop partying at some schools, right? We've got a spectrum there too. And so, Pat, I apologize. I didn't realize you were also certified in interpersonal communication. So I've missed that on your bio. I apologize. And so, talk about a little more, if you would, this concept of teaching them different ways. When you talk about they may have only learned one way to pray, what do you mean by that?
So some people have learned liturgical prayers, so they just follow a form when they pray. So they can be exposed to, how do you pray with others in a group? They could do prayer walking. They can have times of silence, solitude, things like that. And I don't know if Pat wants to add anything to that, but just broadening whatever tradition they grew up in, trying to broaden it. Yesterday at Park Street in a staff meeting, we only have 5 minutes left at the end of the meeting. And we wanted to pray for all these requests. So we just did Korean style prayer. And
which is what?
That's hard for me because I can't stay focused, but we even try that sometimes. So just where everyone all at once prays out loud together.
Okay.
So for 5 minutes, all 10 of us just lifted up all the requests that we just shared with each other.
Okay.
And I had to plug my ears because I couldn't concentrate. But yeah.
I remember being at a meeting once, and we only had 2 minutes to pray before we were going to be late. And the guy who ran it was a Pentecostal, and he said, we need a Catholic prayer right now. We don't have any time for Pentecostal prayers. And so now flesh out a little bit more for you, if you would. So I clearly got the message of you guys are doing this in small groups with students. And so what does it look like, though? Is it like every Wednesday night we come together and we do Bible study, or what does being in community and small groups and disciple making look like in Crew?
I'll take a stab at that. I'm pretty passionate about this. When I think about the core of what Crew does well, at least the Crew ministry that we're a part of here, it is the small group and making that space a space where I like to say where the masks come off and where people feel like it's a safe place to admit the kind of stuff that's going on inside, the insecurities, the fears, the depression, the struggles with besetting sins and stuff like that. And so there is, as you I'm sure know, a loneliness epidemic in America right now, and it's particularly acute among our student population, and it's brought on, I think, a lot by social media or whatever, but the bottom line is people don't feel like anyone really knows them. And to create a place where people can feel free to really admit that brokenness, because actually that's what it means to be a Christian. Christianity is grounded on a confession that we're broken people in desperate need of a savior. So to be able to come in a place and to create a norm that we get people to really open up and talk about what's going on in their life. That to me has been critical for our discipleship. People are, the focus is a little bit less on just getting more knowledge and a little bit more focused on actually enacting that knowledge, like living out these 71 another commands in the New Testament, like pray for one another, confess your sins to one another, speak truth in love to one another, encourage one another. These are the kinds of practices that we try to establish them as this is a norm. This is how we do things. And yeah.
Like one thing in a small group that is very helpful is that it's like a second family. So whatever you didn't learn in your first family growing up, you actually can learn now that you're in this small group. And so we do training for facilitators, like what do you need to do as you start to lead the small group? So the setting up of the norms. And a lot of times the groups do that together, and then the holding people to the norms. So if someone starts to break them, then we, as a facilitator, bring that to light. Even in these small groups, we're teaching them to listen so that not one person's dominating, but everyone's listening to each other's story. And so instead of just saying, oh, I can relate to that after someone shares something, we're just telling them to say something like, tell me more, keep going, anything else? We're inviting people to say more instead of reading our autobiography into people's lives.
And so what does that look like then? Is that like, if I go to Crew, am I going to sign up for, Wednesday night at 6 o'clock, we're going to have dinner together and then we're going to pray or say Bible, or is it not as is it more programmatic than that or not as programmatic as that? What does it look like? What would be my experience if I signed up? I think I might be past your age group, but still, what if I signed up?
From the beginning, when we meet students, even as we have the last couple of days, we're giving them a little, well, actually, it's now something they can take the picture and put it on their phone and respond to a survey that would give them, here's who we are, here's what we do, here's some places where you can get plugged in. Small groups is, like kind of at the top of the list. Mm-hmm. But, just for people who want to have a conversation with someone about their spiritual life, that's on there. Our international mission opportunities, our retreats, and all that stuff is there. So they can indicate what they're most interested in. If I could go back though, I want to make one other comment, Charles, because when I think about our discipleship groups, which, by the way, has been the biggest thing that has evolved in my own sort of ministry philosophy and discipleship approach. One thing that I've been spending a lot of time on lately is trying to get people in a group to go through a process of thinking about, well, it's basically a testimony writing process, but what it comes down to is first spending some time just wrestling with and talking about what the gospel is and what the implications are of, having our sins absolved, of a God who, the fact that we are loved unconditionally and perfectly by God, and that we can be completely absolved of our sin and brought into his family, and how profound the gospel is. And then wrestling with that in a group and asking people, when has that really taken root in your life, and talk about that moment. And how is your life most different when you've really understood the truth of the gospel in your life? And then we let them take some time to reflect upon how this bigger story of the gospel has affected the smaller story of their life, and find a way of articulating that to other people. And then they share it in the group. And what's been fascinating is how this not only has contributed to deeper discipleship, but it's resulting in more fruitful and faithful evangelism. But what happens in those moments when they start telling their story is people are really listening with them to what the gospel is, and they're making connections themselves, and it's going deeper. They're giving feedback, and even sometimes, people are realizing things that they didn't know just by getting this feedback that, yeah, actually, my issue is not that I have found meaning and purpose. My issue is that I've, really finally experienced forgiveness, or something like that. Or it could be one of many different themes of how the gospel transforms and changes our lives. But that's, that would be, I share that because that shows you how we as a group that is also known to be very evangelistic, see that evangelism is a core practice for discipleship, because it not only, allows others to come to know the gospel, but it takes the gospel deeper in our own life when we share it and when we reflect upon it and as we talk about it.
Just to give folks scale, because somebody posted on our Facebook page not too long ago in response to something that the Ivy Leagues prevent anybody from learning about Jesus, which I gently pushed back and said, well, I don't think that's quite true. I don't think they control things that way. I don't think. What's your experience? How hostile are people to faith working in an elite university setting? And how big a program is it? Because I think there's a lot bigger stuff happening than people realize at elite universities.
I'll speak to the size, the scale, and then Pat, if you don't mind, the hostility, if you could talk about that. I think it's encouraging for people to know that there are 600 undergrads out of 6,000. So 10% are in Christian groups.
At Harvard.
Wow. And that's just Harvard. That's not MIT and all the rest. That's just Harvard. That's amazing.
That's Harvard, 10%. And so I'm really encouraged. So I personally haven't had a lot of pushback, but Pat has other things.
Sorry, just to jump in for a second. Imagine if 10% of New England were Christians, right? So there's actually more Christians involved in ministry at Harvard than there are in the broad swath of New England, which is closer to 2%. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow. Sorry, Pat, go ahead.
No, I don't buy that. I actually think, at least at Harvard, which is the only Ivy League school I've worked on, there's been remarkable support for people of faith, and in particular, even evangelical Christians. I think it's more within their own. Sometimes their classmates are appalled, at some of the ideas that more conservative Christians hold, and that becomes a challenge for them. But I haven't felt it. I've felt more support from the administration. I mean, Harvard has a church in the middle of it, and that church, Memorial Church, has been incredibly generous and gracious and supportive of the evangelical students on campus. So, yeah, would you agree?
I agree.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like the administration of school is not hostile, but some of the students run into issues when I hear you're an evangelical Christian or a Christian, I perceive these things about you that I find objectionable, that you may have never said or believe. But that's happening a lot now in our culture. And so what are the areas where you're seeing where young people are, I hate to use the word deviating, but maybe breaking from what our generation may have viewed as this is the way Christians view the world or think? What are some differences you all see?
That's a great question. There's something that's sitting not so well with me that I've said that I want to come back. If I can try, go ahead. To the question. I do want to say this, that I think it's true that students who go to any college, but especially when you're going to one of these really elite schools, and that the professor is one of the smartest people in the world in his field, or he wouldn't be where he is. And if that professor is not a professing Christian, or if they may have considered Christianity and rejected it, that's a hard thing for any student to wrestle with, or if there is a critique that they're bringing against Christianity. I felt that, when I was a graduate student, and I remember that was one reason why, sitting under the teaching of Gordon Hugenberg, of a guy who's one of the smartest guys that I've ever met in my life, and having him every week, taking on the big questions that are brought up against the Bible and against the tradition of Christianity, and realizing that, there are really smart people that have wrestled with the same questions that others in the university have wrestled with, and for that reason they've rejected Christianity. But these people have thought about it, and there are good and satisfying answers to the deepest questions that trouble people. It's not so much a matter of the intellect, but a matter of the will of people unwilling to choose to believe something.
Yeah, because me being the smartest guy in biology, which I'm not by any stretch of the imagination, but me being the smartest guy in biology doesn't make me the smartest guy in the things of God. Right. And so people like C.S. Lewis, right, consider the same thing. People like Frank Collins, Dr. Collins at the National Institute of Health. We have a board member who's a PhD in nuclear engineering and physics, who's a believer at MIT. So there are people, I agree with you, there are people who've considered this. I may not be able to answer everything that person says because they're out of my league intellectually, but there are people who are just as smart and have considered it and landed in the same place where we have.
Right.
That's a good point. And so now I forget what question I asked you that you said let's pause. Oh, it was what are you seeing that's different between where our generation may have thought of Christianity or viewed Christianity or thought about God and this generation?
Colonization is a big problem.
What do you mean by that?
So I just read the Barna's Future of Missions book, and students have a big problem with some of the things that we did as we went into countries. I just read a great book this summer. As I watched what happened as the missionaries went in, I just thought we need to be super careful what we're doing biblically and theologically as we go. And so it was just inspiring me to be more careful. So the students are sitting in classes where they're actually hearing the actual stories of what happened. And
where we're going as missionaries to bring Jesus, but we bring all of Western civilization with them too, the good and the bad.
Yeah.
And then to be Christian means you must be Westerners. And that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. So that is very hard for students. Then the politics and religion, evangelicals now can be looked at as a voting bloc. And so the students don't even know about using that word anymore because they don't want to be looked at as a voting bloc. So that's another really hard. I don't know if you have anything.
Maybe the divide between young people aren't as locked into, white evangelicals. If the polls are to be believed, right, white evangelicals vote Republican, and black people tend to vote Democrat, and all. And they're saying, so as young evangelicals, I don't vote the same way, or I don't want to be part of that conversation, or something else.
Both.
So. I mean, I think it's even a little bit more than that. I think that is pushing younger people away from the evangelical church. Its alignment, apparent alignment with conservative politics, partisan politics, is a huge turnoff. That's a problem. I think increasingly, our generation this young generation of students, they don't buy the argument about, what has been the orthodox view on sexuality. They're way more sympathetic to, the fact that that God, cannot be opposed to their gay friends having the same opportunity that they have to share their love in the covenant of marriage with someone of the same sex. So these are big issues for us on the college campus, and big issues that are leading to people just giving up, walking away.
Yeah, race is another huge one, and as we've all watched, I really appreciated your podcasts and the guests that you've had on, the conversations that you've had. But it is really a huge problem. We, like in Cru staff, we've been working on cultural competency because this is really an important area. And students want to see that in their movements, we actually are acknowledging some of these issues that have arisen, and they want places to talk about it and interact over it. So.
And on issues of gender, and of course, this is always a dangerous topic to talk about in the church. But I rush in where wise men fear to tread. And so is their issue that they would not subscribe to what we would call orthodoxy on the issue, or is their issue that no, you can be orthodox, but I don't really see the church treating people who are LGBT with real love and welcoming and caring while remaining orthodox, or is it a different issue?
Some don't have the orthodox view or traditional view of marriage, and then some just want us to have a different posture.
Okay.
That's really important, how we interact with people in this community and love them.
Because sometimes we always say all sin is equal, right? It all grieves God. All the wages of sin is death, right? So there's a sense in which all sin is equal, but there's also a sense in which practically over the years we've kind of carved out some special sins, and gossip is an okay sin, but to be same-sex attracted is not an okay sin, right? It's sometimes what we do to people. Yeah. Okay. Right. And so how are they working that out then? How do they work out that tension or that issue? Does that then say, okay, well, look, if I'm for gay marriage, then I can't be a Christian and I leave? Or do they say, well, no, I'm a Christian. I just have a different view on that, or something else?
Some students are doing one and some are doing the other.
Yeah,
so
okay, not one answer.
Some young people are creating their own structures. With new churches, for example, that have different beliefs. And then some are staying within the existing structures and trying to encourage people to change their posture.
And how much does that peer pressure weigh into the conversation that we were talking about earlier on? Because there's one thing of, well, look, this is my theology, but there's also the part of, well, but my theology is formed within a construct of peer pressure that concerns me. And so how much does it weigh into that, or do you think it doesn't?
I mean, I think it does, for sure. factor in. But I also think, I think people are closer to people who don't fit the binary gender norms, and they, that closing that distance does reopen that conversation for anyone who comes with, this our more traditional view on sexuality.
Yeah, it is a tough topic because while remaining orthodox, we do want to love other people. We're commanded to do that. Everybody's made in the image of God, and we have to love them. And we haven't always figured that out in general. And when we line up, when we're perceived as partisan one way or the other, we start to lose the ability to do that, it seems. Jesus was so good at loving you and being truthful with you. And it seems that we're good at either loving you or being truthful, but not both at the same time. And so I'm not sure how to fix that. And I'm as guilty of it as anybody. but it really, that seems to be the struggle we're dealing with.
And this goes back to an earlier conversation about, what are the gaps that we're seeing in students' lives, and why communication, Tammy said, has been such a big thing for us. Is that I do think it's not just a student problem; this is an American problem. That we have this null-sum logic that we think defines every issue, and there are so many issues right now that are dividing people and making them really angry at each other. This one is one of them, but there are all these political issues and social tensions where you are. The null-sum logic goes like this: that if you put a plus next to what's true and a minus next to what's false, there's this assumption that on any issue, if what I believe is true, then what another person believes is false. And that that is the fact is that there's truth in a lot of the awareness that people have on these different issues. And so the goal for conflict resolution that Tammy and I have found very helpful is seeking to understand. That if you set that as your goal, as opposed to someone you completely one person being right, the other person wrong, and coming to realize who's who in that, but instead just really understanding what the person is saying and what the wants are behind there. And you realize that a lot of these things are just values that have been they're just in a different order for each other. So empathy is probably the character quality that I think is most needed. Yeah. Something that we try to model. It's something that we try to create in our small groups. And it's something that we specifically teach, as far as, empathetically summarizing what you've heard, not just the details, but the sort of feelings and the wants that are embedded in what people are talking about. That goes a long way toward, transforming people, really growing people, and holding together communities that are otherwise just fracturing.
Yeah. And I think missing all over the political spectrum is the concept. I can't remember who said it to me. I think it was actually Doug Scalisi down in the Cape, is that one of the greatest gifts of love is to listen to what someone says. And we don't exist in a culture that really encourages that.
Right.
And so we're almost out of time. I didn't realize we're so close to the hour. What I would like to hear is some cool things you've seen God doing, because we know He's always at work, and you're at work in a really unique place. Would love to hear some things you've seen Him do that would just be encouraging.
I'll just share a story about a gal who contacted us a year ago. She emailed. She was in Canada. She was a junior at Harvard. And she said, I just found you on the website, and I just wondered if I could get involved. And she was not a believer. And so she joined a science and faith group that was on Zoom, and she joined a Jesus and anxiety group that was on Zoom. 2 months later, she came to know Jesus. So a big thing that we're seeing is people belong before they believe. So she was hanging with us for 2 months and then came to know Jesus. So now she's one of our leaders. She's going to be starting to lead a small group this fall. And so a couple of weeks ago, we met her for the first time. So we just saw her in a box.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, there she is. We can hug her.
Yeah.
So it's just so fun to see how God can work in people's lives, even through little boxes, even from a distance.
Well, I love that too, because so often, right, we can fool ourselves into, well, I did this, then this happened, and it caused this and that, and then this came out that was really good, and I can fool myself into thinking, so that was what I did. Right? But when people call you out of the blue, and we just had a similar experience, it's just like, okay, well, I can very clearly see I did nothing here. This was all God.
Yeah, the start of her process was reading Ecclesiastes, and then she contacted our group. She thought, I need to find out the answers to these questions.
What an interesting spot to start. I don't think I've ever heard somebody say, I read Ecclesiastes and it made, right? That's very interesting. I could see that, given some of the things you're saying. That's really interesting. Pat, what were you going to say? I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that Tammy and I, we live in a house that with 12 other people, that is kind of the dream we had for our life, even before we came to Boston, that we could bring our ministry into our family and our family into our ministry by, just being close enough to people where you can actually live the gospel in a community and not just, come together a couple hours a week for a Bible study or a worship service. And I would say one of the most exciting things, not only for me, has not only been the experience of, living that way, but it's one of the reasons, by the way, Charles, why just campus ministry to me is so thrilling and exciting, because you do have students living together in really tight quarters, eating together, sleeping together. Some of them share the same wardrobes, and they're just with each other 24 hours a day. And in that kind of a context, you can really live out the politics of Jesus, by which I mean, how you make decisions, how you defer to each other, how you structure power, all these things that make the kingdom of God and the body of Christ in such a transformational and radical upside down kingdom. They can do that, and we're close to them, so we can be sort of a part of it. Hopefully in 2 days, we're going to have 30 students here for a barbecue, being in community, doing life together. But the thing, that's all to say this, probably the most exciting thing that we've done in the last 11 years has been start this international, what do you call it? It was a mission, but it's basically a learning, a supplemental learning experience for students in the townships of South Africa. This was started when the AIDS pandemic was exploding, and all these kids were growing up without their father or mother. And so we thought, let's get close to the problem of the AIDS issue in South Africa and see if there's not something that we could do that could be helpful. And we found a place where we can come alongside of South Africans and serve by just teaching them how to write better, how to read better, how to do math better, so that they can get into college. Anyway, that's our role. But actually going with students there and being with a Harvard student for 3 weeks. I mean, I get more time with a student in Africa than I will their entire time at Harvard in those 3 weeks. But you're able to, this is what discipleship to me is really all about. It's caught, it's not taught. People are with each other, not just with us, but with each other in a community, living out these one another's, being a part of a Christ-centered, spirit-filled community where you're experiencing Christ, not just in the private piety of your own spiritual disciplines, but you're experiencing him in the lives of other people in whom he dwells, and so that's to me been one of the things that has made me, but you can pray for us, because the pandemic has shut that down for the last year and a half, and we're not sure we'll be able to go again in January. So, but that's it.
Okay, that's helpful. Before I wrap up, if folks want to learn more, follow you, give to your ministry, where would they go?
They can email us at our website.
Yeah.
Just patandtammymcleod.com, and then you can just send an email.
That's a good idea.
Great, thanks. Well, guys, thanks so much for being with us again. But thank you for ministering in such a unique place to have such an impact over time and globally. And it's just so clear God has placed that calling on you and put you there very strategically. And so we're grateful to you for being so faithful answering that call. And so thanks for that. Thank you to our audience for joining us. Hope you heard something in here, right? Cru is a phenomenal ministry, and Cru at Harvard, obviously, you've learned how great that is. And so hope this helped you think about your own church's discipleship program or disciple making program and how you're making disciples, because we're all called to do it. It's not, Jesus doesn't say, go and get some disciple makers at Harvard, and then the rest of you are all set. So we're all meant to be making disciples and being made disciples. So I hope there was something in here that was helpful to you in thinking through that. And thank you to our producer, Ashley Pitkin. If you like this, please share it, follow us. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, and you can get more information at visionnewengland.org. And if you can't find Pat and Tammy somehow, email us from our website and we'll get you connected. So thanks very much. Our next podcast, we'll have Joyce Shetler-Holt, who is the executive director at Hagar Sisters, which is a really innovative online ministry that is looking to love, serve, and support people who are suffering domestic abuse. So that's what we'll be talking about next week as we lean into doing justice. So thanks very much. God bless you all. Bye.